Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of our Rimworld Extreme Desert Challenge, as for the first time in this series we are starting an episode with not one but two colonists. In the last episode we were lucky enough to receive Edmo as a reward for a small quest, and I would say he has settled in nicely. Now, we are starting today's episode off after Rimworld has received a small update. A few changes have been made, mostly to psychic abilities and a few other minor things. I don't think we need to go through all of them at this point. Overall, I would say 98% of the game have remained the same, but if we stumble upon a mechanic that has changed, I will of course take a moment to explain it. With that being said, let us jump straight into today's episode. Edmo is coming fresh off of a mental breakdown and is now repositioning our armchair. Afterwards, he can run out into the ruins up north and collect some steel, and we can see he is still suffering from ambrosia withdrawal, but I hope that in today's episode we will finally be able to beat his addiction. A few moments later, we see colonist founder Steak arrive in the ruins as well, and together they quickly decimate the place. Back in the base, we now have enough resources to construct ourselves a hand tailor bench, because in the previous episode we unlocked complex clothing, and so today we are going to make some. More specifically, we will craft ourselves a duster for Edmo, who is currently still struggling a bit with heatstroke. His simple clothing is not really protecting him all too well from the heat out here, but a nice camel hide duster will hopefully change that. When it comes to heat protection, the duster is by far the best clothing item in the game. Eventually, we will of course unlock high-quality suits of armor that will serve a similar purpose, but this early in the game, a simple duster is pretty much a requirement for everyone in our colony. Now, while Edmo starts tailoring, Steak has begun mining. One of the goals for this episode is to build ourselves a small steel reserve. That way we are prepared should we ever have to quickly build new beds or replace our traps. And that is pretty much how the next few hours of the day pass by, until I noticed that the 4 mechanoid corpses we have lying around the base are currently deteriorating. And I'm pretty sure this was actually an oversight on my part and not a change in the latest update. In any case, it does require us to make this small area into a proper room, which is of course quickly done with a few walls and a door. While Steak is constructing, we also have our first event of the episode, and this is a potentially very lucrative one, as a meteorite of silver crashes down. So once we have some time, we will definitely strip this for resources. For the time being though, there is no pressing need. Instead, we can watch Edmo finish the camel hide duster here, but despite being a better craftsman than Steak, it is still sadly only of poor quality. Nonetheless, it does provide a pretty solid heat insulation, so let's have Edmo put it on immediately. And there we go, he can now withstand temperatures of up to 47 degrees Celsius, and that should be enough at least until the next heatwave comes. So at this point we can of course put the armchair back in front of the research bench, and then it is already time to go to bed. However, Steak's last meal before bed sadly has some consequences, as he once again comes down with food poisoning. So let's try to go easy on him for the next day. He will be in some pain and we don't have to push him. With both Steak and Edmo asleep, we then also have a group of travelers pass by, but they don't have anything to trade, so we'll let our colonists sleep. While they are asleep, however, we can already prepare for our next project, which is going to be a small cactus farm. Now, cacti, and all other trees in this game, behave a little different from regular crops, as they require one tile of free space all around them. Now, normally we would expect our colonists to pay attention to that on their own, which should automatically result in the planting pattern that we're drawing here. Unfortunately though, pawns tend to plant trees all over the place, with the efficient use of the available space definitely not being their primary concern. So in my experience, it works best if you kind of force them into this growing pattern here. And yes, in a larger area this does result in an abundance of individual growing zones, but especially out here in the extreme desert where fertile soil is extremely limited, I think we absolutely have to make the most out of the resources we're given. And so on the next morning, Edmo heads out and starts planting right away. As you can see, this will take some time, but perhaps Steak can help down the line. For the moment though, our colony founder continues mining until we have a transport pod crash that should attract our attention. Inside of the pod we have the barkeep Gary, who unfortunately belongs to a hostile faction, which means we cannot actually rescue him. However, we could capture him, and looking at his stats and traits, that might be a worthwhile idea. Not only is he a fantastic socializer, he is also a capable melee fighter, and well, on top of that he is also an abrasive cannibal, and speaking from experience, those are always fun to play with. Now, health-wise, his injuries are actually not too severe. He does have a wooden foot though, so his movement speed will be somewhat slowed down, but then again, as a potential frontline melee fighter, he might not even need to be that quick. In any case, I think we have enough arguments here to at least try our luck, so let's put down the sleeping spot and capture Gray. Worst case scenario, we obtain a few clothing items and gain some medical experience, and that alone is probably already worth it. Now back in the base, with our prisoner getting some rest, we now have to focus on more pressing matters, namely our 2 dromedary corpses, which are both about to spoil in just a few hours. So let's make them into meat while Steak is tending to our prisoner's wounds, of course not before removing any clothing items that might fetch us a good price. We will actually also allow the consumption of raw meat at this point. With over 250 units available, we won't be able to make them all into kibble anyway, at least not considering the current growth state of our crops. We should keep in mind though that eating raw meat adds a separate mood penalty on top of the one for eating kibble, and you can see the effects of that in action right here, as Edmo suffers yet another mental break. And this time, it could potentially be a bigger problem, because in his berserker rage, Edmo will now attack anyone he sees. Now, luckily for us, the incident happened outside of our base, so Steak is safe for the moment, and our visitors also seem to have left the area already, but still we should be extremely careful here not to expose Steak to Edmo at this point in time. Thankfully though, Steak himself takes his sweet time consuming his meal, and not only that, with his food poisoning slowly recovering, Randy decides that once is not enough, and Steak is gifted yet another round. So it looks like we will have to work with a slightly handicapped colonist for at least one more day. For the time being though, Steak can clean up his mess and head off to bed. Our berserker Edmo, meanwhile, is still wandering around outside of the base, and at this point it does actually look like he will not come inside, so now we only have to wait until his mind break comes to an end. On the next morning, however, the situation is still unchanged, and it actually gets worse. Having recovered a bit from his injuries and also very hungry, our prisoner now also goes into rage mode, and this time we have to take action because it's very clear here that he has put his sights on Steak. Steak himself though carries a short bow, and although I don't like it, I think it is the best option at the moment. Thankfully, one shot is enough to put an end to things. It does, however, not necessarily speed up our prisoner's recovery. Still, we're not giving up just yet and can continue to patch him up. Maybe our help will eventually be rewarded. For now at least, we have Edmo come out of his rage, but after wandering around the desert for hours, we can't really expect much from him, so after a quick meal, he immediately goes to sleep. And as if Edmo's recovery was a sign, Steak decides that it is now his turn. Yes, he also suffers a mental break now. Thankfully though, he simply decides to hide in his room. Edmo meanwhile continues the medical work and then goes back to sleep, and so we finally have the chance to see a few calm, uneventful hours pass by. Eventually then, around midnight, Edmo is awake again, and we now actually have to do some harvesting. As you can see, in a few hours all of the dromedary meat will spoil, and sadly our rice fields will not yet be fully matured when that happens. So once again we have to harvest what we can right now. Hopefully it will be enough to make a decent amount of kibble. Thankfully Edmo is a skilled gardener and the harvesting doesn't take long, so in the early morning hours with plenty of time still left he is already making food. At this point, Steak's mental break thankfully also comes to an end, and he does the sensible thing, going to bed to sleep off the stress. A few hours later then, Edmo finishes his work at the butcher table. As you can see, we still have a few units of meat left over, so let's consume what we can before the rest goes bad. With all of the rice harvested, we of course need to sow out new plants, but again, that is a job that Edmo takes care of in quick fashion. Eventually then, it is time for Edmo to finally get back to cactus planting. Our small plantation has, well, not really progressed all that much yet, so let's hope the next few hours go by without interruption. Steak, meanwhile, has also rested and can continue mining, and of course we don't want to forget about closing the gaps in our walls again, otherwise enemies will have an easy time getting into the base. Once we have sappers showing up, we want to make our walls a bit stronger and sturdier anyway, but for now just having a wall in the first place should hopefully be enough. Now, unfortunately, it looks like one incident is hunting the next one in today's episode. This time it is once again our prisoner acting up, as he has decided that now would be a good time to try and escape. So let's go with the bow. It worked the first time, let's see if it does again. Okay, the prisoner is down, his list of injuries keeps growing, and I will admit at this point I'm slowly starting to wonder whether or not this guy is worth all the effort. Still, for now, let's recapture him once again and clean up after him, and then give Steak the opportunity to once again increase his medical skill. Edmo meanwhile continues planting, but our prisoner is not stopping being a burden just yet. It was almost to be expected, I think. With the plethora of injuries the guy has accumulated over the last few days, it is no surprise that one of the wounds has now gotten infected. And again, at this point I'm actually very hesitant to give more care than necessary, so we're trying this with no medicine. Let's see how this goes. Now, because it looks like our prisoner here will probably stay for a while longer, I think it might actually make sense to give him a room of his own. Not only will that block his line of sight to all the ugly things around, like stockpiles for example, but it will also make escaping a little more difficult. Now let's keep in mind this guy is still a prisoner, so we don't have to do anything fancy here, so a little 2x4 cell is all he gets. And there we go, it took the removal of one sandstone column here to actually put this together, but we now have a small prison cell. The rest of the day is then spent with cleanup and plant work, and we can see the cacti are making good progress. Now, good progress, that is unfortunately also what our prisoner's infection is making. However, as you can see here, his immunity percentage is actually a tiny bit higher, so there is a decent chance he survives this. In any case, the infection is arguably not our biggest concern at the moment anyway, as we now have a pack of man-hunting iguanas appear. Now, there's only 3 of them, so this should not be too much trouble, and we can of course also sit and wait them out. Now, since we have a pack of man-hunting animals on the map here, let's quickly talk about something that was actually added in the last update, and I am talking about this here, the scarce disease. This disease is what actually causes the man-hunting behavior, and while it can now be cured if the animal is successfully downed, the bigger change in my opinion is the fact that animals who have this disease have a chance to instantly rot upon death. So manhunter packs are no longer a guaranteed free source of food, which I think actually balances them out nicely, especially in the late game. Now, once again, we of course do not want to waste our precious traps on iguanas, so we'll quickly bring all of them back inside and make sure that no one leaves the base, and then Steak can go to sleep. And with the base on lockdown, Edmo can take care of the prisoner and then play some hoopstone, and we can also see here that he is finally about to beat his ambrosia addiction. Just 1 more percentage point and the withdrawal has finally come to an end. Before we can celebrate, however, we have a quest pop up, and this looks like a quest that we might want to accept. We could once again obtain another colonist here, however, she is currently being chased by 5 tribespeople. Still, considering that we only need to kill 3 of them to actually make them flee, and also considering that we have 4 traps and 3 man-hunting iguanas at our disposal, I think this is a quest that we want to accept right here and now. Now right away we want to move Edmo behind the southern door of our base, because it might be necessary to briefly draw the iguana's attention so that our new colonist can safely make it over. And that new colonist is now arriving, so in the span of just 2 episodes our colony has grown significantly, and just like last time, the first thing we have to do here is change the name. As always, for this purpose we are referring to the list of patrons in the naming rights tier and above, and the name that was randomly selected this time is Red Hawk. So congratulations Red Hawk and welcome to the colony, let's hope you arrive in one piece. Before we start Red Hawk's journey though, we can take one quick look at her stats, and just like Edmo, she appears to be a pretty damn useful colonist. Interestingly enough, exactly like our prisoner, she has a very high social skill. She is also a capable doctor and has a passion for mining, while the only thing she's not capable of is firefighting, which is interesting by the way, because Edmo can't do that either. Traits-wise, there is also absolutely nothing to complain about here. Fast learner might be one of the best traits in the entire game, beautiful could also have its advantages, and tough is great for combat, even though Red Hawk here surely isn't. The health tab also doesn't show anything to be concerned about, so let's hope that she can avoid the iguanas on her way over to the base. Here we now also have the arrival of her pursuers, who interestingly enough appear in 2 separate groups, a group of 4 down here to the south, and 1 lone tribal warrior to the northwest. And Olga here actually gives us a few interesting options to make this fight a little easier. The first one, however, is to simply wait until she gets closer. In the meantime, we can have Steak build a bed for our new colonist. There is sadly not enough time though to make her a proper room at this time. Much more importantly though, she makes it into our base safely. 1 single iguana was following her, but fortunately was not quick enough. Luckily for us though, that iguana is now heading straight for our lone attacker here, and any outcome of this fight would help us. We would either get rid of the annoying manhunters, or our enemies would suffer their first casualty. As the first iguana goes down here, we can also see the effects of Scaria in action. The corpse immediately rots and has become unusable for butchering. In the end then, it is the second iguana who wins the fight, and so the group of 5 enemies is now already down to 4. We also have the 2 animals to deal with, but I think that should be an easy task for Edmo, who, as you can see here, is actually an incredibly talented melee fighter. Coincidentally, we also still have a Thrumbohorn lying around, which is a very useful melee weapon. So let's equip it, send Edmo out and hopefully get rid of the iguanas quickly. Okay, 1 hit, 1 kill, but I believe that was the already injured animal. Let's see how he does against the third and final one. While he's on his way to the fight, Randy also sends a Psychic Soothe our way, so mental breaks should hopefully not be a concern, at least for the next few hours. The second duel here meanwhile goes just like the first one. 1 hit is enough and Edmo emerges victorious. He did suffer 2 small injuries though, so let's get him back inside of the base and give him some rest. Our medical expert Red Hawk is also quickly by his side with some herbal medicine, and so his wounds are patched up quickly and he should hopefully be good to go again in no time. Our traps around the base are now also being put back into place, and so I'd say we're ready for the enemy assault. Before that assault takes place, however, we are being informed of a medical emergency here, and it has to do with our prisoner whose infection has progressed to extreme levels. Still, at least for the moment, his immunity percentage is still slightly ahead of the curve, so hopefully with a good quality treatment in a few hours we can avoid his demise. There is nothing we can do about it now, and we also have bigger concerns, because the remaining 4 tribespeople are now beginning their attack. Since they all have melee weapons, we can send all of our colonists out to greet them. Edmo has re-equipped the bolt-action rifle, while Red Hawk is sporting a pump shotgun. Our enemies are closing in quickly though, and we can't get off that many shots. Still, we attracted enough attention so that one of them immediately runs into a trap. That leaves only 3, and of course they can't get inside, so we can already send Edmo back to bed while we use a Red Hawk as bait. This leaves Steak to deal with any fires our enemies might lay, and surprise surprise, that is what they're doing, while Red Hawk has found a pursuer who himself quickly finds his death. Looks like we will have to kill at least one more enemy though, and at this point it might be a smart idea to relocate the trap at the southern entrance, so that our enemies hopefully run into it on their way to the door. And indeed, that works like a charm, and with that the raid has been defeated. It is now high time for Steak to put out the flames, otherwise we risk losing our entire heal root farm, and so we won't pursue and instead try to repair all damages quickly. That of course also includes replacements for all the traps we used, something that a fully healed Edmo can take care of, but it also involves digging a few graves, because of course the corpses here should be moved out of sight as soon as possible. Now, we also have good news from the prison. Our captive did actually develop an immunity against this infection, so let's hope we don't have to injure him any further and that he makes a full recovery. Speaking of recoveries, Edmo has also finally beaten his addiction, so no more withdrawal, no more mood penalties, and hopefully also no more mental breaks. Sadly though, not all is well in the extreme desert, because just a few hours after defeating our first raid, we now have another one to take care of. And this time our enemies look slightly better equipped. A few of them have guns, once again there's 5 of them, so I think we could have a challenging fight at our hands here. We do still have a bit of time though until the actual attack takes place, so we can use that to put bodies into graves, repair walls and clean up the base a bit. Until then, in the evening, the pirates are launching their attack. Now, while they're approaching, we can of course try to land a few pot shots. Unfortunately though, neither Steak nor Edmo can find a target and we quickly have to retreat. The first attacker here then also runs straight over 2 traps without triggering them, so this raid is certainly not off to a great start. Shortly after though, we can use Steak to lure the first enemy at the northern gate to his death, and as you can see here, Edmo follows suit in the south just a few seconds later. We also already have flames up here, so we probably should end this raid as fast as we can, and it looks like Edmo's presence alone is enough to achieve that. Another enemy attempts to follow him and runs straight into a trap, and with that the pirates flee and we have won. And because I like to end my episodes on a high note whenever possible, I would say let us slowly wrap things up now. This episode was certainly challenging at times, but in the end we managed to grow our colony further, and who knows, maybe we can continue to do that in the next episode as well. As always, I hope you enjoyed this one, and if you did, then I would of course be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. And if you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can of course subscribe to stay up to date, or you can check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon, and who knows, maybe even get your name into the game as well. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.